Welcome back to Static Voices. It's late, you can't sleep, and neither can I. So let's make the most of it. Tonight, we have a few stories we're going to cover, each creepy in their own right. I'll let you decide which one is the scariest. Our first story is, The Vents in My Childhood Home Used to Talk. I'm finally selling it. I put the house up for sale this week. The realtor came through with her clipboard and asked me the standard questions: water damage, foundation issues, any deaths on the property. I answered every one of them like a man who wanted the check more than he wanted to sleep at night. There's no box on that form for what actually happened here, so I'm putting it here instead. I moved back into this house a few months ago to take care of my mother. I'm not ready to say why I'm selling it now, only weeks later. I need to start from the beginning, or none of this will make sense. My parents bought the house in 2006. I was 8. My dad kept saying we got it for a steal. There was some story about the people who lived here before us, but I only ever got pieces of it. A fast move out, a for sale sign that went up almost overnight. My mom telling my aunt on the phone that the realtor got quiet when asked how long the place had sat empty. I was 8. I didn't ask why a house was cheap. I asked if my room had a window. It did. It also had a vent low on the wall by the closet. For the first year, that's all it was. The ticking started that winter once the heat kicked on for the season. Every house makes noise when the ductwork heats up, so nobody thought much of it. My dad checked the furnace once, found nothing wrong, and left it alone. Then things started creaking in rooms nobody was in. I'd be at the kitchen table doing homework and hear a floorboard give upstairs, and when I went to check, nothing. My mom said it was the house settling. She said it enough times that I started saying it to myself, too. I was 9 the first time it wasn't just a creak. I was in bed with the lights off, and I heard 3 ticks come out of the vent by my closet, evenly spaced. Then a voice came through it, low, bored. It said my name. I didn't move. I told myself I was half asleep, and my brain made a word out of nothing. I got up the next morning and said nothing to anyone. Vents don't talk. I knew that. I was 9, not stupid. It kept happening after that. Not every night. Some weeks, nothing at all. And I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Then it would come back. One night I stuffed a towel into the vent before bed, thinking if I muffled it enough it might stop. The voice came through anyway. Same volume, same everything. I pulled the towel back out in the morning before anyone could ask why it was there, and I never tried blocking it again. If it could get through a towel, there was no point. It wasn't only a nighttime thing either, though it took me longer to notice that part. I was doing homework at the kitchen table one afternoon, still daylight out, when a draft came off the vent near the hallway floor. Cold enough that the hair on my arm stood up. Cold air where there shouldn't have been any. Gone as fast as it came. At first, it just wanted to know if I'd answer. Was I awake? Was I scared? I never said a word back, not once. But that didn't seem to bother it. It kept going anyway. And it started asking me to do things. The first ask was small. It wanted me to break something of my brother's, some toy. I don't remember which one. It said he wouldn't notice, said it would make things easier around the house. I didn't do it. I just lay there with a blanket up to my chin and waited for it to give up. It didn't give up. It wanted me to hurt my brother, Danny. Not his stuff, him. When I still didn't move, it switched to our parents, what I could do while they slept if I wanted the house quiet for good. I never told anyone. Part of it was knowing nobody would believe a voice was coming out of a vent. Most of it was just fear. I didn't know yet that it wasn't only talking to me. Danny was 2 years younger than me. He started sleeping worse around the same time I did, but nobody connected it to anything, because kids go through phases. Nightmares, wanting the hall light on, waking up sure someone was in his room. My mom chalked it up to his imagination. And I said nothing, because saying something meant I knew it wasn't just his imagination. Danny listened to it more than I did. I don't know why. Maybe he was just younger. Maybe I'd already shown I could just lie there and ignore it, and he wanted to see what happened with someone who couldn't. Within a year, he'd stopped just losing sleep over it. I noticed the change before I understood what it meant. He got quiet around our parents in a way he never used to. He watched them at dinner like he was studying something. Once my mom went to hug him goodnight, and he went stiff. So stiff, she asked if he was feeling okay. He said he was fine. I was in the hallway. I heard all of it and still said nothing. I already suspected what was happening to him because it had already tried happening to me. His grades slipped that year too, though nobody put it together with anything at the time. He'd always been the better student between us, and by spring his teacher was sending notes home about him falling asleep in class, not turning in homework he used to without being asked. My mom scheduled a meeting with the school counselor to talk about it. I sat in the waiting area outside the office while my mom went in, thinking I should tell someone, right then, that I could walk in and say what was actually keeping him up at night. I didn't. I sat in that plastic chair and picked at a loose thread on my backpack strap until my mom came back out and told me it was probably just a phase. One night, a few weeks before everything happened, I woke up and found Danny standing in the hallway outside our parents' door, just standing there, eyes open but somewhere else. My dad found him a minute later and walked him back to bed, chalked it up to sleepwalking. Danny didn't remember it in the morning. Around that same time, Danny came into my room one night and sat on the edge of my bed and asked me straight out if I have ever heard anything weird at night coming from the vents. I've never forgotten that question, because it was the closest either one of us had come to saying it out loud to each other. I told him no, and he nodded and went back to his room. If I'd said yes, even once, maybe he wouldn't have felt so alone with it. I'll never know, because I looked my little brother in the eye and lied to him instead. Then one night, everything changed. I woke up around 3 a.m. to my mother screaming. I got up and ran into the hallway, and my dad was already ahead of me, and through their open bedroom door I saw Danny standing at the foot of their bed holding a kitchen knife, and my mother pressed back against the headboard with her arm out. My dad got the knife away from him without much of a fight. Danny wasn't holding onto it when someone else had a grip. He just stood there shaking, and then he started talking, and once he started, he couldn't stop. He said a voice told him to do it. He said it came through his vent, that it had been talking to him for months, that it told him our parents were the reason the house couldn't be quiet, that doing this would finally let everyone sleep. He kept repeating, it told me, while my mother cried and my dad tried to hold him, and neither of them understood what he meant, because neither of them had heard anything themselves. I had. I stood in that doorway and listened to my little brother describe, almost word for word, the same voice that had been coming through my own vent for 2 years, and I said nothing. I said nothing that night, nothing in the days after when the police came and Danny kept insisting there was a voice in the walls, and everyone in the room looked at him like a kid who'd clearly lost it, and nothing when they decided to have him evaluated. The evaluation turned into an admission. The admission turned into weeks. And the weeks turned into him never fully coming back, and through all of it, I stayed quiet. I could have said something that would have changed how they saw him. I could have told them I'd heard it too, that he wasn't crazy, that something in that house was real. I had every chance. I said nothing, because I was 11 and terrified that admitting the voice was real. I was afraid I'd end up wherever they were sending my brother. A police officer sat with me alone in the kitchen that morning while the paramedics checked Danny over in the other room. She asked simple questions, easy ones, whether I heard anything unusual before that night, whether Danny had said anything to me recently, whether things had been normal at home. I told her everything had been normal. I sat at that table and lied to a police officer's face at 11 years old, and she wrote down something on her notepad and thanked me for my time like I'd been helpful. The house was different after that. My parents stopped talking about Danny at the dinner table unless it was strictly necessary. My mom left his room untouched for almost 2 years before finally packing it up. And I remember walking past that closed door every day. We visited him every few months at first, drives that felt longer than the miles. He looked like Danny, but talked slower, medicated. Once, maybe a year after it happened, he asked me directly if I still heard it. No lead up, like we were picking a conversation back up instead of starting a new one. My parents were getting coffee down the hall. I told him no, I didn't hear anything anymore. And he looked at me for a long time before saying, okay. He didn't believe me. I've never forgotten that look. So Danny went into treatment for what the doctors called a psychotic break, and I got to stay the normal one. I heard that voice right up until that night. After it, nothing. I noticed the silence and felt relieved by it. It had gotten what it came for, one way or another, and it seemed to have no more use for the rest of us. That's not to say the house went completely quiet in my head. A few times over the years, I'd wake up sure I'd heard 3 ticks, or a voice starting to form out of the static in the vent, and I'd lie there rigid for a full minute before realizing there was nothing at all. Just my own nerves, wired from years of listening for something that had already moved on. I couldn't always tell the difference between the real thing and my own imagination even back then, which is part of why I never trusted myself enough to say anything out loud. I got older. I studied hard. I stayed out of the house every chance I got. Sports, friends' houses, anything that kept me somewhere else after dark, even with nothing actively happening to justify it. My parents thought I was just a busy kid. They had no idea I was still flinching at a sound I hadn't heard in years. The day I left for college, I packed my own car and didn't ask my parents to help carry anything. I hugged my mother goodbye in the driveway. I told my dad I'd call every week. I never once looked back at the house, and I let myself believe it was because I didn't want to get emotional in front of them. That wasn't why. I didn't look back because I still believed that if I turned around, I'd see something in that upstairs window watching me leave, and I didn't want to know if I was right. I didn't spend another night in that house for over a decade. My dad passed a few years ago. Heart attack. It was sudden, no warning. I came home for the funeral, stayed in a hotel 20 minutes away instead of my house. My mother stayed in the house alone after that, and for a while she managed fine on her own. I called her every Sunday, and every call I asked how the house was holding up, meaning something very different than what the question sounded like. She always said fine, quiet, nothing new, and I always believed her. Then her health started declining, slow at first and then not slow at all, until the day her doctor sat both of us down and told her she needed round-the-clock care. I didn't think twice about moving back in. She needed someone there full-time, and I was the only one who could do it. I was 28, not 11, and whatever I remembered from this place was a kid's imagination stretched out over a decade of not having to think about it. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Most places do once you live somewhere else for a while. The furniture had changed here and there, new carpet in the living room, a different couch, but the layout was exactly the same. And walking through the front door for the first time brought back a specific smell I hadn't thought about once in all that time. I stood in the front hallway for a minute with my bag still in my hands before I made myself keep moving. I took my old room. It seemed easier than setting up in the guest room down the hall from her, and I liked being upstairs away from the medical equipment they installed in the dining room. I didn't think about the vent by the closet until I was already lying in bed the first night, staring at it in the dark. Nothing happened. I lay there for a long time waiting, and when nothing came, I figured I'd built the whole thing up in my head. I fell asleep somewhere past 2 a.m. and woke up to sunlight and my mother's aide letting herself in downstairs. And the day went on like any other day, taking care of someone who needs help getting to the bathroom and remembering to eat. The first week settled into a routine faster than I expected. Mornings were medication and breakfast, and getting her positioned comfortably before the aide arrived at 9. Afternoons, I handled whatever the house needed. Bills, groceries, calls to her doctor's offices. Evenings, I sat with her while she watched whatever was on, and most nights she was asleep by 9. The arrangement felt manageable. I called Danny's facility once during that first week, something I hadn't done in longer than I want to admit. A staff member told me he was doing about the same as always, stable, cooperative, no real change in years. I asked if I could speak with him, and she said she'd check, and I sat on the phone for almost 10 minutes before she came back and said he didn't want to talk right then, maybe another time. I didn't call again after that. The second night, I heard 3 ticks come out of the vent. I sat up so fast I got dizzy. Furnaces do that, ductwork does that. I was a grown man scaring himself over expanding metal. I almost believed it until I noticed how cold the room had gotten compared to the hallway. For close to a week after that, it was just the ticking and the cold, nothing more. Some nights I'd hear it 3 or 4 times before I fell asleep. Other nights, nothing at all. And I start to think it really was just an old furnace working out the kinks. I checked the vent covers myself during the day, looking for anything loose, and I never found anything. I actually called an HVAC company that week and told them the heat seemed to be making noise and running cold in one room. A technician came out, spent close to an hour checking the furnace and the ductwork, and told me everything looked fine. No leaks, no loose fittings, nothing that would explain a temperature drop like the one I was describing. He offered to replace an aging thermostat just in case, which I let him do, and it made no difference at all. I didn't call anyone after that. There was nothing left to blame it on. Then one night, the voice came through, low, exactly the same as it used to be. It didn't say my name that first night it spoke. It just talked, quiet and idle, testing whether I was awake, whether I remembered how this worked. I lay there answering nothing, and it kept going anyway. It took a few more nights before it started using my name again. Once it started, I did what I'd always done. I lay still. I didn't answer. I figured if I gave it nothing, it would eventually quit. It didn't quit. It stopped sounding like itself. It sounded like Danny. This wasn't a voice that reminded me of my brother. It was his voice, the one I hadn't heard in person in years, since visits had gotten harder to justify to myself the older I got. It asked if I remembered what he tried to do. It asked if things would have gone differently if I told someone the truth back then. It asked whether I thought he deserved what happened to him, alone in a facility for half his life, while I got to leave and build something that looked like normal. Most nights I just lay there gripping the blanket, reminding myself he was 3 hours away in a place that didn't have a phone in every room. I knew that. It didn't stop the cold that went through me every time it started up. It had his voice down to details nothing but Danny could get right. The drawn-out way he used to say certain words, a stutter he'd had as a kid that came back whenever he got upset. Then one night, it stopped asking questions and started repeating something else. Word for word, in his voice, it said what Danny had screamed the night my parents found him standing over their bed. Our mother was the reason the house couldn't be quiet. I could finally let everyone sleep. It would be a mercy since she was already halfway gone, and nobody would blame a man for wanting to end a mother's suffering a little early. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I lay there and let it talk about killing my own mother in my brother's borrowed voice. And when it finally went quiet before dawn, I got up, checked on her, made her breakfast, helped her with her pills, and said nothing to anyone about what I'd heard. I handled it just like I did as a kid. I went quiet, waited it out, and called that fine. Looking back, there was a window right around then, maybe a week, maybe less, where I could have moved her out of that house without anyone questioning it. Just told her doctors I couldn't manage her care alone anymore, and gotten her to her facility before anything happened. Thought about that more than once. I even looked up a few places online one night, scrolled through photos of clean, ordinary rooms with handrails and call buttons, and closed the laptop without calling any of them. My mother started saying strange things about 2 weeks after the voice began repeating Danny's words back to me. Small things at first, easy to explain away. She'd asked me if Danny had called that day, and when I reminded her Danny was still institutionalized 3 hours away, she'd get a confused look and say, of course, she knew that. She must have been thinking of someone else. I chalked it up to her medications or her age, and she started asking about the house itself, whether I could hear it at night, whether it got loud. I asked her what she meant by that, and she just looked at me with an expression I couldn't place, somewhere between apology and warning, and said never mind, it was nothing. She was tired. I should have pushed harder in that moment. I didn't, because I still didn't want confirmation that she'd heard anything too. A couple days after that, after I brought her dinner, I found her staring at the vent across from her bed instead of eating. I asked if something was wrong with the food, and she said no, she just wasn't hungry. She was still looking at the vent the entire time she said it. She barely touched the plate that night. The aide mentioned the next morning that her appetite had been dropping off all week, and the doctor added to a growing list of things they were monitoring, alongside the confusion and the disrupted sleep. Nobody connected any of it to anything specific. It read as ordinary decline, nothing more. A few days after that, her daytime aide pulled me aside before leaving for the evening and mentioned, almost in passing, that my mother had been talking in her sleep during her afternoon naps. Not mumbling, actual sentences, clear enough that the aide had stopped and listened. She said she couldn't make out most of it, just a few words here and there, and one phrase that stuck with her enough to bring up. Let everyone sleep. The aide said it was a strange, sweet thing for an old woman to say in her sleep. I thanked her for letting me know and said nothing else. 2 nights after that, I got up around 2 a.m. to get water and passed her door on the way back. It was open a few inches, same as always, so the aide could hear her if she needed anything overnight. I looked in without meaning to, and she was sitting upright in bed in the dark, wide awake, hands folded in her lap, staring at the wall across from her. I asked if she was okay, and she said yes, she just couldn't sleep. There was nothing in her voice that sounded alarmed. She sounded calm in a way that didn't match a woman who should have been startled to find her son standing in her doorway at 2 a.m. I went back to bed thinking of it as a woman her age having trouble sleeping. I didn't let myself finish the thought that came right behind that one, that she looked exactly like Danny used to look right before he stopped just losing sleep over it and started answering. 3 nights later, I woke up to the sound of her bedroom door opening down the hall. She hadn't walked on her own in over a year. Her legs didn't do what legs are supposed to do anymore, not since the stroke that put her in bed in the first place. But I heard footsteps, slow and uneven, coming down the hallway toward my room, and by the time I sat up and got the light on, she was standing in my doorway. She wasn't hunched over like she usually was when the aide helped her into a wheelchair. She stood straight, straighter than I'd seen her stand in over a year, both hands hanging at her sides, her eyes fixed on me without blinking. She didn't say anything, she just stood there. I asked her what she was doing out of bed. She didn't answer at first. She took a step into the room, then another. Then she spoke, and it wasn't her voice that came out. It was Danny's, the same one that had been coming through my vent for weeks, coming out of her mouth instead. It said my name, just like it had when I was 9. It asked if I remembered what we talked about. It said now was the time, that she wanted this too. Somewhere underneath, that all I had to do was let it happen and everyone could finally be quiet. I don't fully understand what happened next, even now. She came at me faster than a bedridden woman in her 70s should have been able to move, and it took real effort to keep her hands away from my throat. Her fingers dug into my forearm hard enough to leave marks that lasted the better part of a week. She wasn't screaming, she was almost calm about it, still talking in that borrowed voice between breaths, telling me to stop fighting it, that this was always how it was going to end for one of us. I got her onto the floor and held her there, my forearm braced across her collarbone, waiting for her to tire out. Any exhausted, sick woman should have gone still inside of a minute. It took longer than that. She kept pushing against me with a strength that didn't belong to her, and I remember thinking in the middle of it that I was going to have to hurt my own mother to make her stop, and not knowing if I could go through with it. At one point, she stopped struggling entirely for a second or two, just long enough that I loosened my grip without meaning to, and her head turned toward mine, close enough that I felt her breath on my face. She said my name in Danny's voice, quiet this time, almost gentle, and asked why I was always making things so difficult. Then she came at me again, harder than before, and I pinned her back down and stayed there, not answering, not loosening my grip a second time. It didn't come to that. All at once, the strength went out of her. She went limp under my arms. And when she opened her eyes again, a moment later, she was crying, asking me why she was on the floor, asking what had happened. She had no memory of standing up, of the hallway, of the voice that came out of her mouth on the way there. I called an ambulance. While we waited, I sat with her on the floor because I couldn't bring myself to put her back in that bed yet. And she kept asking me over and over if she'd done something wrong, if she'd hurt me. I told her she hadn't done anything, that she just had a fall. And she believed me. At the hospital, a doctor asked me a series of questions about her recent behavior, memory lapses, any falls, any confusion, all without much urgency in his voice. I answered honestly about the confusion and the sleep talking, and I lied by omission about the rest. I told the paramedics and later the doctor that she'd fallen trying to get out of bed on her own. I didn't mention that she'd walked the length of the hallway first, or what she tried to do once she reached my door, or whose voice had come out of her mouth while she did it. I already knew how a story like that sounds coming out of someone's mouth. I watched it happen to my brother. I wasn't going to let it happen to me or to her. A hospital social worker sat down with me the next morning to talk through the next steps, given how her care needs had changed overnight. She asked gently whether I felt safe continuing to care for her at home, phrased in a careful, practiced way that made it clear this was a question she asked plenty of times before. I told her I didn't think I could manage her care alone anymore, which was true, just not for the reasons she assumed. She nodded like she heard the exact sentence 100 times and started walking me through placement options, wait lists, paperwork. I signed what was needed without asking many questions of my own. Getting her somewhere else, anywhere else, was the only thing I wanted clearly by that point. She's in a full-time care facility now. The doctors say what happened that night was some kind of episode, possibly related to a change in her medication, possibly a small stroke that hasn't fully shown up on the scans yet. Nobody has suggested anything else, because nobody else was in the hallway to see how she stood, how she moved, how calm she was reaching for me, or heard whose voice she borrowed to do it. I spent a weekend packing up her room after she was admitted, mostly clothes and old medication bottles and paperwork that needed sorting. In her nightstand drawer, I found a photo of the four of us from before Danny got sick, taken at some birthday party I don't remember the occasion for. All of us smiling at whoever was holding the camera. I sat on the edge of her bed with that photo. I don't know what I was hoping to find looking at it. Maybe proof that things had been normal once, before any of this, that the four of us in that picture didn't already have something waiting for two of them in the walls of that house. Put the photo in a box with the rest of her things and finished packing the room. While I was packing up the house to get ready for showings, I found a folder in the back of a hallway closet that had belonged to my dad. Old paperwork from when they first bought the place. Buried in it was the original listing sheet from 2006, along with a few pages of handwritten notes in my dad's handwriting. Questions he planned to ask the previous owner's agent. One of the questions, underlined twice, just said, "Reason for sale." There was no answer written next to it. I also found a business card for the agent who'd handled the sale, long since retired based on a quick search. And I remembered a neighbor 2 doors down once telling my mother, years ago, that the family before us left in the middle of the night without so much as a goodbye to anyone on the block. My mother mentioned it once at dinner. I don't think she ever considered it might mean anything. I looked up the family's last name out of curiosity, the one printed on the old listing sheet. I didn't find much. A couple of old public records placing them in the state at the time. Nothing after that year. No forwarding address, no social media presence going back far enough to say where they ended up. Either they scattered and lost touch with each other completely, or they just weren't the type to leave much of a trail. I closed the search after 20 minutes. Some part of me didn't want to find anything more specific than I already had. I put the house on the market 4 days after she was admitted. I didn't wait to see if her condition would improve enough to come home, because I already knew she wasn't coming back to that house. And I knew I couldn't be the one to bring her back, even if she could. I visit her twice a week now at the facility. Last Tuesday, she was sitting up in a chair by the window when I got there, and she smiled just like she used to before any of this started, before the stroke, before the house. She asked if I'd eaten lunch. She asked about the weather outside. Ordinary questions. Then she asked, almost as an afterthought, if the house had been quiet since I moved out. I told her yes, very quiet, and she nodded and went back to looking out the window, and I sat there wondering if some part of her remembered more than the doctors think she does, or if it was just a question that happened to land close to something true. The realtor asked her questions, and I answered every one of them straight-faced. No, nothing structurally wrong with the house. No, nothing unusual to disclose. She commented on how quickly I wanted to close, said most people take their time with the family home, and I told her I just wanted to get it done. I signed the papers with a steady hand, answering the same question someone must have answered back in 2006, sitting across from my own parents, knowing exactly what he wasn't saying and choosing to say nothing anyway. I used to wonder how a person could sell a family a house with something living in the walls and let them find out on their own. I don't wonder anymore. I'm doing the same thing right now, closing on a sale in 3 weeks. A young couple came through for a showing last weekend. First-time buyers, according to the realtor. They had 2 kids with them. A boy who looked about 9 and a younger girl who spent the whole walkthrough holding her mother's hand. The boy wandered off toward the stairs at one point, and the mother called him back before he got far. They asked questions about school district. They asked if the previous owners, meaning my parents, had been happy here. I said yes, for the most part. The wife ran her hand along the wall, already picturing where furniture would go. I didn't say anything else. The realtor handled the rest, and I stood by the front door making small talk about the neighborhood, while upstairs, the vent by my old closet sat exactly where it always had, waiting for whoever ends up sleeping in that room next. I'll probably never know who lived in that house before us, or what happened to them. Whatever this thing is, it prefers people who don't ask too many questions. And after everything it's taken from my family, I'd rather just be done with it than understand it. I'm not proud of any of this. I'm just done being the one it talks to. The fact that I'm posting this here should be an indication of just how bad the situation is. My name is Sean Hammond. I'm a sheriff's deputy for Barron County, a small, rural county in southern Ohio. It always amazes me how many people don't seem to know where that is, and even more curious how few maps out there actually show it. I never could really figure out why our little section of the Appalachian foothills has gone unnoticed for so long. It's almost as if the rest of the world had forgotten about it. And for its own part, Barron County seems to neither notice nor care. Ever since the coal company stopped most of its mining operations in the mid-'80s, Barron County hasn't had a lot going for it, other than being a great place to go camping. Still, there are people here, and when you get enough people in an area, that generally equals jobs, which means money, which means crime committed by those who don't want to get a real job against those that do. That vicious cycle is what fuels my job, even though I dread the calls as much as the next cop on the beat. Usually it's either a domestic dispute or a drug overdose, since Barron County seems magnetic to drug dealers, and it can get exhausting at times. You get callous to the demanding, uncooperative families, the repeat offenders who show no shame, and the tight-lipped women with bruises on their faces that couldn't have come from a tumble down the stairs. After a while, you get to where you think you've seen it all. That's where I was in my career, until a few weeks ago. I sat in my car along a lonely stretch of Route 142, a 2-lane asphalt road that stretches the length of the county and connects the town of Collingswood in the center to the slightly bigger city of Black Oak in the north. My buddy and de facto partner, James Walker, slouched in his patrol car parked beside mine, facing the opposite direction so we could talk to each other from our roll-down driver's windows while we took our lunch break. So which one? James chewed on a sandwich, the usual tuna fish and rye combo that he always brought without fail. I grinned and poked at my Tupperware bowl full of barbecued beef. Andrea, for sure. James grunted in friendly mirth. You and redheads, man. She's nice. I defended my choice of which pretty courthouse clerk I'd rather date with my plastic fork poised in the air like a pointer to seem intellectual. Every time I go in there, she has this real big smile on her face. And she doesn't act like she's too busy to talk to me. And she's smoking hot, right? James teased, his dark eyebrow raised. Right. I laughed along with him, though under my uniform, my heart skipped a beat at the flash memory of Andrea's pretty face framed in crimson locks. Man, she was pretty. And every time I went into the courthouse for an errand, I almost couldn't bring myself to talk to her, as shy as a little kid on a playground. That didn't stop me from volunteering to be the guy who brought our records into the courthouse every Monday, however. And sometimes when I was alone on patrol, I practiced what I figure I'd say to her if I ever got the nerve to ask Andrea out. You like barbecue? I know this great place in Collingswood. No, that's not it. Hey, Andrea, how do you feel about Ferris wheels? I'm going to be working the guard shift at the county fair, and I thought, nah, that's no good either. James shifted in his driver's seat and wiped his fingers on a napkin. I'm still going to go with Tracy. She's got spice to her, and man, can she fill out a skirt. Rolling my eyes at my friend's fascination with the blonde from the second floor, who wore everything as tight as she could get it, and winked at every guy who noticed. I took a sip from my Coke. You know she's probably slept with like half the... Base to Unit 14? I jumped, and my radio crackled to life with the sound of our dispatcher's voice. James's goofy grin faded, and all thoughts of pretty women left my mind. The smell of my barbecued lunch now turned my stomach, and I forced myself to take a deep breath. Here we go. With clammy fingers, I reached for the shoulder mic to click the black talking button down. Base, this is Unit 14. Send your traffic. A few moments passed, and I prayed that it was something minor. A raccoon in the school trash cans. A branch down across the nursing home driveway. Or old Miss Phillips calling to complain about the neighbor's dog barking too loud for the 8th time this week.
Unit 14. Respond to a distress call from a campsite at 1849 Bethesda Ridge Road. Reports of possible child abduction. At least one civilian is missing. A night ranger from New Wilderness is already on site. Link up with him and proceed with caution.
Unit 14 copies all. Moving to respond. Pushing the lid back onto my half-finished lunch, I tossed the container into my passenger seat and put my car into drive. Base, this is Unit 13. James clicked his mic and threw me a nod from his car. I'm nearby, moving in as backup. How copy? I frowned and shook my head, the blood cold in my veins. You don't have to do this. But my partner just let slide a small, knowing half smile and nodded back. Yes, I do.
Unit 13, this is Base. Solid copy on all. Showing you and Unit 14 dispatched at 2348.
Flicking my lights on, I threw James one last look, and together we swung our patrol's car around to pull onto the long, dark road. My guts twisted, the shadowy landscape flying by, and I cursed under my breath. Despite the drug problems and domestic abuse issues, Barron County was quiet, rustic, and even nice in some places. Most of the normal people were salt-of-the-earth types, and even though I wasn't a church-going man, I could appreciate the idea of a guy in the sky helping keep people from getting too rambunctious. People down here didn't riot when we arrested some dopehead for beating his wife. They didn't throw bricks at my car in the name of some pseudo-revolution started on Twitter. And the kids all smiled and waved when we drove by in town. We got treated like human beings for the most part. And rarely did we have to respond to anything other than an overdose or a husband-wife screaming match that woke up half the neighborhood. But New Wilderness was different. Round stones ground under the tires of my squad car, and I swerved around countless potholes, the blood pumping in my veins. Barron County's government had rolled out a modest but rather successful road repair program a few years back, and yet none of the crews ever seemed to make it down to the claustrophobic dirt roads surrounding the New Wilderness Wildlife Reserve. With 12,000 acres of mixed woods and grassland partially fenced in to house endangered species, it bordered a colossal 70,000 acres of forested recreational grounds still owned by the coal industry, making it the most rural and picturesque place in all of Barron County. Still, the park seemed to garner very little sympathy or attention from local authorities, almost as if they hoped it would slide off the map, which I found odd, since New Wilderness brought in a fair amount of business from big city tourists. Unfortunately, the only memory I had of the place was of long hours tramping through wet, creaking trees with the K-9 unit from our neighboring county. Focus. I shut my eyes just for a moment, trying to force the memories out of my head. Still, I could see her. The girl they'd brought in all those months ago, covered in cuts and bruises, wearing someone else's clothes, her sky-blue eyes wild as a cornered animal. I hadn't been ready for that night. None of us had. It's not going to be like last time. Drifting into one of the many campsites that dotted the vast expanse of recreational land, I spotted a big red pickup truck parked next to an expensive-looking white camper trailer. A black SUV squatted about 20 feet away, and I recognized the insignia of the New Wilderness Night Rangers immediately. After everything from last October, how could I not? He didn't do it, I swear. It was the road. It was the road. You have to believe me. The voice echoed in my head. The girl's sobs still as clear as the night her father had brought her into the station, soaking wet with black, smeary handprints all over her clothes. Stop, I muttered to myself, desperate to forget the horrid past. It's over. It's not the same thing. Instead, I waited until James pulled up next to me and clicked my shoulder mic. Base, this is Unit 14. I'm on site with 13, but the place looks deserted. I repeat, I don't see anyone on site. Making my first approach at 06. How copy? In the bright aura of my squad car's lights, I searched for a sign of movement, for someone hiding behind the camper, or perhaps looking through the closed blinds, but saw nothing. A small nagging suspicion flared to life in the back of my mind, the ice under my skin telling me that something about this situation was very, very wrong.
Unit 14, this is base. Solid copy on the first approach. We've got units 12 and 11 on standby if you need more backup. Keep us posted. Base out.
I swallowed the dry, sour-tasting lump in my throat and pushed my car door open. A musky aroma of wet, rotted leaves curled up from the damp ground to tickle my nose carried on the thickening clouds of cotton-white mist that hung between the murky treetops. This had been a warmer March than usual, at least in the beginning, and the roiling clouds overhead threatened rain with the new temperature front. Mud squished under my shoes, deafening against the tomb-like silence of the nearby forest, as if every stick and stone held its breath in anticipation. Beyond the treetops, 3 white lights blinked sporadically in the distance, likely some kind of cell phone towers or radio antennas, though it was hard to tell from the ground. James appeared at my side in a flash, and we moved almost in sync, flashlights in hand, free arm rigid at our sides, ready to snatch for our tasers, batons, or, God forbid, our service weapons if necessary. With all the strange things I heard about this place, I wasn't sure if I wouldn't skip right to the Glock if things went as bad as my childish imagination suggested they might. Thought the ranger was supposed to meet us here, James muttered, his hand on his gun, eyes scanning the crowded trees beyond the tiny campsite. I cleared my throat to keep my voice from squeaking like a mouse. He was. Let's check the vehicles, then clear the camper. If they're not here, we'll call it in and wait for more backup. Moving closely as a team, James and I made our way to the red pickup truck and black SUV. Both were empty, and we couldn't find any signs of foul play. It was as if the campers, along with the new wilderness ranger, had just up and vanished. At the foot of the metal steps that led up into the camper, I paused and drew my pistol. It weighed cold and heavy in my palm, a deadly reminder of how fast my job could get ugly if I wasn't careful. Behind me came the soft click of James doing the same, and his hand gripped my shoulder in a silent signal that he was ready to follow me in. I rapped my pale knuckles against the cool fiberglass door of the camper, short and fast. "Hello? Sheriff's office. We got a call about a disturbance?" Long, tense seconds ticked by, marked only by drum beats of the pulse in my ear. Nothing. Again, I banged on the door, louder this time, in case somehow the occupants were asleep or hard of hearing. "Sheriff's office. Open up. Is anyone there?" Silence. Nothing but the strange, high-pitched creaking of the trees in the distance, swaying with the wind. I hate this part. Gripping the door handle, I pushed the button on the small light mounted under the frame of my Glock and shoved. The door swung inward about 5 inches and squished to a stop. A strong, coppery stench hit my nostrils, and from underneath the door came a small trickle of cherry-red fluid. I recognized it right away, and it made the already unpleasant situation that much worse. Someone was either hurt or dead, which meant this had just gone from a lost child to an investigation that could go on for weeks on end. If it was anything like the last one, it might not even be solved or recorded. My stomach gurgled in revulsion, but I rammed the door with my shoulder, and at last it gave way. Mary, Mother of God. Inside the inky, cramped interior of the camper, the walls, ceiling, windows, and floor were covered in splattered chunks of torn viscera, thick scarlet smeared all over everything. It looked as if someone had been thrown into a jumbo-sized blender and then spewed out with a leaf blower. Bits and pieces of unknown anatomy clotting under my shoe to mix with the sticky Ohio clay from outside. The rank, metallic stink of blood hung thick in the air, and I tasted the beginnings of vomit in the back of my throat. But the worst part about all of this was the silence. Nothing moved. Not a sound could be heard, as if the place were a kind of holy shrine to some macabre deity, and to speak was a grave sin. James gagged and leaned against the doorframe. "Dear God, what could have done this? A bear?" If only. I don't think so. I had to shut my eyes and breathe through my mouth to avoid hurling my barbecued beef all over the crime scene. No bear could do this. Coughing and spitting, James steeled himself and pointed his pistol toward the dim interior. Let's clear this and get the hell out of here. I can't keep breathing this crap. We padded slowly through the hellish darkness, our guns raised, and every hair on my body stood on end. Fear overwhelmed my disgust, though just barely. And as I moved through a small alcove in the narrow living kitchen area, my guts twisted into a hard knot. You seen this? I choked down a foul gulp of air and shone my weapon light at the left side wall. In the living area, a couch lined one wall, across from a small compact range and mini-fridge, with some wooden cabinets over them. A big shattered window sat behind the couch to look out into the dark forest beyond and let in what little moonlight filtered through the gloomy, overcast sky. Glass covered the floor, but from what I could tell, it appeared that most of the shards had flown outward, as though someone had leapt through head first. More blood caked the couch, with bits of glass glued to the floor to sharp crimson lumps. But it was the opposite wall, covered in smooth faux linoleum, that caught my attention. Handprints. Dozens upon dozens of handprints, some big and burly, others small and slender, dotted the wall like some freaky prehistoric cave. Rivulets of red stills trickled down from the prints, as if whoever had made them just had gone, scuttling off into the night right before we pulled in. But they weren't the desperate claw marks of someone being attacked or dragged. These were purposeful, almost childlike in their placement, and from the various sizes, I realized that it had been more than one person. In the middle of all the prints, as if framed by them in some sacred reverence, were 4 words. Look for the lights. James. I met his wide-eyed stare, the pistol trembling in my hand. Call for backup. Call the sheriff. Get everyone out here now. He bobbed his head and reached for his shoulder-mounted radio mic. Base, this is Unit 13, requesting immediate backup. Static grated in the little plastic speaker. Base, this is Unit 13. Do you copy? My heart pounded as I realized that I couldn't hear him over my radio, that I didn't hear his radio crackle or click. I tried mine. Clicked the talking button over and over, even turning the dials to try and reset it. Nothing. It's dead. I breathed, too scared to feel sick about all the gore I stood in, and my brain raced with terrified confusion. How? James pounded his fist against the radio on his belt in desperate frustration. I charged it. It was on full power. We're not out of range. We can't be. Why didn't you call the police? The sheriff's harsh accusations cut through my mind, and I saw him standing across a narrow table from the girl with auburn hair who had tears in her eyes. We couldn't. There was no way out, no service, nothing. Why won't you listen? Glancing down at the lifeless radio in my pale hand, I shook my head to clear the guilty memories away. We have to go. Get back to the cars, get on the horn, and call somebody. This is bad, man, real bad. James moved for the door, and I followed so close behind that I almost bumped into him when he lurched to a stop. What the? He backed up against one gore-encrusted wall in shock. I turned my head to follow his gaze out a small window to our left. Unlike the big living area window, this one was intact, and through its hazy glass, I could just discern a white ball of light bobbing in between the trees. It looked just like the cell phone antenna lights I'd seen dotting the horizon, but this one moved up and down, swaying side to side through the trees, reminding me of the reflections of cows' eyes when a flashlight is shone on them in the dark. The orb didn't move like a shooting star, and I knew that it was far too low to be an airplane. No, something about the erratic, almost hypnotic jerk seemed organic, like some gargantuan firefly that had at last ripped free of its prehistoric cocoon. In the distance, a faint screeching sound followed closely by a dull thudding echoed in a mechanical chorus. I took a step closer to the window, drawn in with moth-like wonder to the ethereal glow. Are those footsteps? Without warning, a greasy chunk of viscera slid under my shoe, and I tripped. The flashlight flew from my hands and rocketed into the floor with a deafening clack that sent chills down my spine. A clamor like a strange electro-synth foghorn tore through the air, and the camper was bathed in a blinding cascade of white light. Somewhere outside the camper, trees snapped, underbrush crashed, and the screeching, thumping noise grew rapidly closer. Dull tremors slithered through the ground, up my legs and into my chest, growing more intense by the second as whatever was outside drew nearer. No longer fascinated, I whimpered in childish fear and crouched behind the window, too afraid to look out into the source of the beam. A small part of my brain told me the thing outside was hunting us, like a wolf with cornered rabbits, and we walked right into its lair. Whatever it was, it had to know where we were, and this broken horrorscape of a camper was no defense. We had only one choice, to run out and make for our patrol cars, or stay and end up smeared all over the walls. As if reading my mind, James darted to the steps of the trailer, and together we hurtled into the night, guns raised. Trees crunched, branches snapped, and the mucky ground shook beneath my feet. Round beams of light probed the ground around me, like searchlights trying to find an escaped convict. Cold mud splattered up the back of my uniform trousers, and my lungs burned with the damp night air. Crash! Behind me, the camper let out a defeated squeal and collapsed under the weight of something massive, its fiberglass exterior shattering with ease. The red pickup truck groaned with the shriek of rending metal, and its panic alarm blared to life, only to be silenced moments later by another vicious thud. It was right behind us, so close I could almost see it in the corner of my eyes, a sharp, jerky shadow that crawled out of the dark like an angular nightmare. "Base, come in! We need—" James' desperate plea cut out, and I turned to see him snag his shoe on a rock, and down he went. Panicked, I threw myself back toward him, but a wall of light hit me full in the face from directly overhead. On instinct, I looked up. Blinding white light poured into my eyes, and a harsh, high-pitched static filled my ears. My legs slammed to a stop, every muscle in my body frozen, as if paralyzed by some unseen hand. I couldn't think, couldn't move, and my breath barely trickled in and out of my chest. Deep inside my skull, I watched helplessly as my memories were pried open, like someone crawled in through my ears and started to rummage through the folds of my brain. Once more, I saw the auburn-haired girl who had been found just outside New Wilderness last October, almost 12 miles from her abandoned car, dressed in someone else's clothes and raving about a monster killing her friend. I noted the looks of annoyance on the sheriff's face when she refused to admit that the guy she'd been with had accosted her, instead claiming it had been some dark, mysterious road that led her astray. I cringed at the detectives berating her, trying to accuse her, before dismissing her the more she insisted on her bizarre tale. Lastly, I watched the girl turn to catch my eye as she was escorted out of the station for the last time, and caught her desperate, silent plea for someone to believe her. I hadn't. No one had. Yet when the detectives threw the case out, when the files went missing, and the sheriff threatened to fire anyone who talked to the media about it, I knew it had been wrong. The girl didn't deserve to be treated that way. With each question I asked, the more hostile the department had become, and I became convinced that she'd been onto something that the sheriff knew about and the detectives were afraid of. Something hiding in the forest of the New Wilderness Wildlife Reserve. Now you see. My head pivoted, almost as if someone turned it for me, and I blinked at 4 people who approached me out of the light. A man, woman, and young boy, all with outdoor clothes that a family of campers might wear. Smiled alongside an older man in his mid-40s, dressed in the black polo shirt of the New Wilderness Night Rangers. They all seemed so happy, so carefree, and beamed at me with contagious joy. "The light is perfection." The ranger, whose name tag read Daniel, made a bright white grin. "Safety," the woman sighed, her face glowing in the curtains of white light. "Peace," the man next to her echoed, his arms around the woman and little boy. Extending his tiny hand out to me, the boy, who looked no more older than 8, giggled and beckoned me closer. "Come on, come play with us. Perhaps it wouldn't be so bad." The light was nice, warm, and soft. I started to forget about the mysterious girl, the sheriff, and my job. What was my job? I couldn't remember. Something with cars and lights. A big brick building, a red-haired woman who smiled at me every time I went in. Coffee, but nothing like this. No, this was beautiful, safe, perfect. Unable to resist, I let the gun slide from my grip, all 5 fingers outstretched to take the boy's hand. Bang! A gunshot split the air, the light flickering between brilliant white and abyssal black. The 4 people in front of me screamed, their faces contorted into hateful glares of rage, eyes dark as night, and rivulets of ebony sludge spilled down their chins. Pain flared through my head, and I stumbled backwards, clapping both hands to my eyes. A horrible, aching sensation, like I'd been staring at the sun, seared my vision and throbbed in my temples. Hands groped at my arms, clothes, and face, trying to pull me back toward them, but someone else jerked me backward by the pull strap on my ballistic vest, dragging me out of sight. "Shots fired! Shots fired!" A voice screamed over a radio that didn't respond, and my heels dug backward furrows into thick, gooey mud. Through half-blind, bleary eyes, I watched the world around me jolt by. My limbs went numb. I had to focus hard just to suck a breath in and out of my chest, and my brain ached inside my skull. Orbs of light bobbed in the trees all around us, more smashing through the forest, like a swarm of bright white circles coming in to feed. They seemed to be swaying, like the gait of someone walking down a sidewalk, but with less fluidity and more strained, jerky motions. Shaking hands leaned me back against the mud-spattered fender of a patrol car, and I blinked to clear my vision. At last, I saw it. The thing stood as tall as the nearby pines, with 8 thin appendages arched in jagged angles like spider legs. In the glow of the patrol car headlights, I stared in shock at cold, rolled steel, not flesh, with snaking veins of braided steel cables that wound their way up into the insectoid legs. These connected to a twisted cluster of fused I-beams that almost resembled a nightmarish spinal cord. At the end of this jumbled mass ringed in 6 fist-sized light bulbs. A white-painted circular signal dish shook back and forth violently, with a single cone-shaped siren protruding beneath. Underneath the dish hung long, swaying cables covered in sticky coats of gore that writhed independently of each other, with 4 bloody figures hanging broken and torn amongst them. The light flickered and sputtered from where James' bullet had smashed one of the powerful bulbs, dripping sparks like blood, and it seemed the creature was stunned by the damage it had sustained. A tower. It's a frickin' radio tower. With a roar, the patrol car fired to life, and James shoved me into the back seat, my arms and legs tingling with rubbery numbness. My head rested against a window, and I watched with immobile fascination as the entire tree line lit up with more rings of light. Close to 6 of the things crouched just beyond the reach of our headlights. Beneath the first industrial monstrosity, the limp human figures opened their eyes to wave at me, pupils shining moonlight white in the darkness. Their skin was torn, intestines all ripped out, their torsos ragged husk barely supported by a mess of fractured bones. Yet they didn't seem to be in any pain, and made no attempt to free themselves. They just swung there, by their own bent necks, and waved. They waved and smiled. James' car lunged away from the scene and back out onto Bethesda Ridge Road. Just before the campsite passed out of view, the strange iron spider arched its signal dish head back and let out a piercing roar that crackled through the air with the tone of an overloaded synthesizer. Static hissed through my ears, hateful voices screamed in my head, and I slid down the backseat of James's car into blackness. I woke up in the hospital at Black Oak, covered in soft white sheets, and diagnosed with a severe concussion. How something so simple could explain any of what I'd seen, no one cared to elaborate, but I didn't argue. Thankful to be alive, and with a handmade get-well card from Andrea waiting on my nightstand. I didn't want to think about the thing in the woods. I just ate some Jell-O, read Andrea's card 15 times, and got on some nice, medicated, dreamless sleep. By the time James stopped by several hours later, he told me the entire department had turned out to search the campsite high and low but found nothing. No destroyed camper, no smashed red pickup truck, not even a black SUV from New Wilderness. My patrol car was found in an empty turnoff, just across the road from New Wilderness Wildlife Reserve, with my Glock lying on the grass not 50 yards away. It was as if I dreamed the whole thing, with my only assurance that it had been real being my wild-eyed partner sitting in his narrow chair beside my hospital bed. After the hospital released me, I went straight to the station with James to report to the sheriff. Having searched the campsite with the rest of the officers, he didn't believe our story. But when the head of the New Wilderness Security reported one of his rangers missing, along with a vehicle, James and I seemed vindicated at last. That only made things worse. We were both ordered to sign non-disclosure agreements, on pain of being fired and prosecuted should we refuse. Anyone who talked about the event outside of the department was immediately suspended without pay, which ended up being several people. Both our body cameras and dash cams were confiscated, and neither James nor I ever saw the footage. Everyone who wasn't on the force accepted the sheriff's official narrative that I had been hit by a stray bolt of lightning, which had given me a concussion. And just like that, we were silenced, like the auburn-haired girl. Despite my own predicament, I couldn't sleep very well after that. I kept seeing the girl's tear-streaked face in my dreams, her eyes locked on mine as she walked out of the station on the last day of her case. Unable to deal with it any longer, I took to the internet to search for any evidence as to what happened to her. Apparently, the auburn-haired girl quit her job at New Wilderness Night Rangers a few weeks ago, but as to when and where she went afterward, no one can tell. It took hours of searching, but I finally found a series of 3 entries on the site talking about a place called Tarpon Road. The first time I read it, I came close to breaking down in tears, and shame racked me from head to toe, along with a crippling fear. She was right. The auburn-haired girl was telling the truth all along, which meant that what I saw was real. Real and still out there. I don't know if she succeeded in stopping the creatures she encountered, but whatever happened, it seems that now the floodgates have been opened. We get calls out of the New Wilderness area almost every other night, most of them from night rangers, begging for armed backup. Strange events now occur both on and off in the park, in good weather and bad, as if these things no longer have anything holding them back. 2 of our officers have been severely wounded in mysterious attacks, and the sheriff refuses to let us alert the state or federal government about them. James is thinking about quitting, and I'm admittedly on the fence about it. This is spiraling out of control, and yet I don't even know what on earth we're dealing with. I don't think anyone does. If you're reading this and you live anywhere near Black Oak, Collingswood, pack your bags and run. I don't care how long or how far, just get as far from here as possible. For anyone else who lives outside Barron County or even outside Ohio, all I can say is keep your ear to the ground and listen for strange reports on the smaller regional news about incidents related to park rangers and police officers in the woods. Most likely anything will be taken down, discredited, or censored to keep the public from panicking, as I suspect that the sheriff is trying to do. But if you're quick enough, save or print out the page before it gets removed, and you might see the truth. The truth that keeps me up at night. The truth that everyone here is too scared to voice out loud. There's something out there, in the forest around the New Wilderness Wildlife Reserve, and whatever it is, it's spreading.